Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome. We do apologize for the delay. As you are aware, technology can always cause us a little bit of difficulty, but we're here now, insha'Allah ta'ala. Okay, wonderful. Sufi theology. Sufi theology. Okay, so let's have a look. Let me see if I can bring the question up. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Uh, what are the best Sufi books in English would you recommend? Um, it's very difficult because I don't read too many Sufi books, so-called Sufi books, if you like, in English. Um, the translation series of Imam Ghazali's books are usually very good. So if you go to their website, Islamic Text Society, they have some books. You can also order them from other websites. So they have good books on Sufism or Tasawwuf or Ihsan. Um, so it's very important to read these books. It's very important to be aware of them. There's one that I would recommend before you read any book. It's by Imam Ghazali. It's been translated into English. It's called The Beginning of Guidance, Bidayatul Hidayah. Very nice, simple book. Turaf Publishing here in London also have a few books on this topic as well. So worth getting them as well. But books won't be sufficient, my friend. What you'll also need is a sheikh. In our tradition, Islam, it's absolutely central, my friends, that you have a good teacher. You have suhbah of a sheikh who is number one, very well versed in Islam. Thaniyan, he is also someone of suluk, someone who has traveled uh, the path. And in our day and age, I would argue it's more important because of what Charles Taylor talks about of excessive individualism. People think that they can do it on their own. No, in our tariqah, in our deen, you have the sahaba from the word suhba, which means that they learned not from books, they learned from the suhba of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's also worth bearing in mind. So books are very, very important, but suhba of mashayikh, sitting with them, going to their majalis, their gatherings, visiting them, making that effort, very, very important. I've benefited far more from my teachers than just reading books. So it's very, very important to do that also. So I hope that helps. There's a very good book that's come out if you want to read about Ibn Arabi a little bit. Sami Dajani, a good friend of mine, has published a book on this topic on Sharia and Sufism. Worth reading that. Very, very nice, well written. So you find this. You also find this being talked about in Hadith books. So Hadith books are really good, especially when you read about Zuhud, the chapters on Zuhud, or when you read the chapters on not being interested in dunya. You'll find this in Hadith books as well. So worth reading them as well, because Hadith are also points of or references for spirituality and ethics and morality. You'll find that in Hadith very, very strong, and it's all taken from there. So all the scholars who talk about the science, they take it from there. All right. So I hope that helps, inshallah. Sufi theology. Okay. Next question, Roshan. What's your top three tafsirs? I imagine you're talking about the Quran. My number one, always, without exception, is Imam Razi's Mafatihul Ghaib. If you've been following me, you'll notice that I do like that. And it's a personal preference that I have, because for me, I have a mind that's quite philosophically inclined, rationally inclined, and Imam Razi is someone I can find affinity with. Uh, it's not just a book on rational tafsir, it's also a book on spirituality and morality. That's very, very good. That's always my first book. Another one I'm reading at the moment in Arabic is Ta'wil al-Quran by Imam Maturidi. It's been published. Very, very useful. That's a good one. There's another one by Imam Nasafi, which has been published recently as well. Taysir fit Tafsir, I think it is the name. That's very good. In fact, that can be. So I was with Dr. Salabul Haj last week, and we were having a conversation about in the madrasas they teach a book called Jalalain by a Shafi'i scholar, and it's a very simple book. It's not like very difficult to read. It's Arabic. There's just Quran and then there's a bit of commentary, but it gives the teacher the freedom to explain. And he said, "Well, it's a good book, but what about Imam Nasafi?" So I think in Jordan or certain places, they've incorporated that book as well. So I hope that helps, Roshan. Who is your favorite mutakallim and who is your favorite faqih? Yeah, Rob. Um, Faqih, I'll start with easy one at the moment. I find Imam Sarakhsi very, very fascinating. Imam Sarakhsi is very, very interesting. Um, his Mabsut, it's phenomenal. I think I mentioned before he wrote it. He never actually wrote a book. Um, he was actually imprisoned, and he was imprisoned in a well, and he literally dictated the entire volumes of the Mabsut from memory, or just from his oratory skills, and his students wrote it down. He has another book called Usul al-Sarakhsi, which is very, very good too. I have a student who's one of my PhD students, and she's from Turkey. She's doing a PhD on the Mabsut as well. So at the moment, I really enjoy that from Mabsut. I found Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri very, very fascinating as well. I can't quite tell you why, but recently I've been reading him, and I think he's got some very, very powerful insights as well. In terms of mutakallim, this isn't really my field per se. So I don't really have a favorite yet. I haven't come to someone who I feel like I can engage with. Of course, I would have my bias, and I would say Imam Ghazali, may Allah be pleased with him, is someone that I would consider to be an excellent mutakallim, very sophisticated. But I haven't quite got to a stage where I've got someone who's my favorite. All right. Ibn Arabi, rahmatullahi alayhi, what's your thought? Ibn Arabi, a genius. But you need to study him with a sheikh. We studied parts of his Futuhat with a teacher who's from the Akbari tradition, and we had some private lessons with him, and then we studied, like I said, sections of his Futuhat, which are really, really important. But you need a good teacher who can help you understand his vocabulary, his use of words. If you're a legalist mind, or you have a strictly theological mind, you might find things in there that are difficult to stomach, but you have to understand the language and the way he writes to understand him. So his books should be read, but they should be read at an advanced stage in your studies, not at the preliminary stage in your studies. Um, if you read his books, he is very critical of Sufism, by the way. Um, he's very, very critical of Sufism, certain practices. If you read his discussion on Kitab al-Som, he has a very deep conversation on fasting, about different colors. He takes it all from the Quran and Hadith, but at the same time, he rails against people who are excessive in their fasting, who continue to fast non-stop, for example, don't break their fast, or they delay their fast, thinking it's some sort of something virtuous. He actually says this is su'ul adab, this is bad manners with Allah, because Allah said, break your fast, right, when it's nighttime. وَأَتِمُّ الصِّيَامَ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. When you reach the nighttime, you stop your fast. So why are you not taking that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What kind of piety is that? So he has a lot of he's doing tajdeed. He's reviving the tradition, like Shah Waliullah or Mujaddid Al-Fisani. These people, they were reviving what they saw as extravagance in the religion. A good translator, if you like, if I can use that word, I don't mean into English, is Imam Sha'rani. Imam Sha'rani is a good scholar to read because he makes a lot of Ibn Arabi's ideas accessible. There's translations by Chittick, William Chittick, and other people. But if you want like a safe passage into understanding his works, I would read Samir Dajjali's book, which has just been published this year. Really excellent book. It's on my bookshelf. I've read it once. I'll probably read it again. So worth reading. Very accessible. Very good. Especially because someone like me who follows the Hanafi tradition, I remember reading the first few chapters, and I was like, "Oh, this is problematic for me as a Hanafi." But if you go through it, you can appreciate scholarship. I always say to people, by the way, that you should read books that challenge you and may make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, because then you can see what kind of other worldviews are out there, what other scholars are saying. This is why reading is so beneficial, because it opens your mind up to different vistas, different ways of learning, different ways of appreciating things. Okay. Um, Sufi theology. Do you know reasons why Ahlul Hadith and modern day Salafis hate Abu Hanifa? Yeah, this is a long conversation. So I would argue, by the way, Ahlul Hadith and Salafis are two different groups, by the way. They must not be conflated. And the second thing is, there's a lot of diversity within the Ahlul Hadith movement and also within the Salafi movement. Both of them are very diverse. There's been a lot of rich literature written on them recently, and they are, especially the Salafi movement, they are very modern movement. They're almost like the opposite of moderns, because they're almost like the same side of two sides of the same coin when it comes to modernity, because modernity or moderns or modern Muslims or modern Muslims, they say we can approach the Quran or Sunnah without scholars. We can do it ourselves. Okay. Or some of them even go further and say we don't even need the hadith. Na'udhu billahi min dhalik. The Salafis do the same thing. They say we don't need scholars. We can just go to the Quran and the hadith ourselves, and we'll make sense of it ourselves. So we'll just read hadith, which is a huge problem, because I can give you literally countless number of examples where that doesn't work in practice. If you pick up Bukhari and you say, well, it's in Bukhari, I'm going to do that. There are hadiths in Bukhari that no one acts upon. There are hadiths in Muslim that no one acts upon. But you wouldn't know that if you're not a scholar, because there are hadiths that are abrogated. Yani, we don't act upon it. None of the four schools are, no one acts upon it. And there are many things that you won't find in the hadith itself. Right? So, what is the ruling of traveling by plane? How do you perform prayer on the plane? How are you going to do that? It's not in the hadith. And even in the hadith, you'll find you'll find hadiths that seem to be saying contradictory things. So what method are you going to use to make sense of it? So let me give you an example. If you pick up Imam Tirmizi's book, for example, in there you'll find right towards the beginning discussion on how the Prophet ﷺ relieved himself. And you'll find different things. He'd be standing up, sometimes he'd be sitting down, sometimes he went out into the into the sort of bawadi, into the areas outside. Sometimes he was facing the Qibla, sometimes he wasn't. How do you make sense of all of that? Well, you can't unless you know how to do. So what's your method going to be? Otherwise, you're just going to pick and choose hadith, right? And you can say, well, which one's, I'm going to do the one that's stronger. Well, that's not how it works, right? So what you're supposed to do is take all the hadith that are on a particular topic, and you're supposed to make sense of them in a way that you're trying to act upon all of them, right? Because to us, like, there's virtue in all of them. But also, you need a method. And that method, once you have that method worked out, you can now extend that to new scenarios. So, what is it about? If someone asks you the question, my friends, if someone asks you the question, when I'm studying in a plane, when it's flying, can I pray? So you need to go to the asl. What is it about prayer that's really important? Does it mean that you have to sit? Does it mean you have to be on the ground? Can it be something that's in the meaning, ma'na of the ground, for example? Can we find hadith that talk about this? Did the Prophet ﷺ do something similar? Did he pray the camel? So, for example, while it was moving, was it like a farz prayer? Or was it a nafil prayer? For a farz prayer, there might be a different ruling. So you need all of this. And I don't know if they hate Imam Abu Hanifa. That might be a little bit too strong. I just think most people don't understand how schools of law work. The second thing which I'm going to add, is that these movements are very modern, because for centuries we had schools of law, broadly speaking. We had Hanafi school of law, Shafi'i school of law, Maliki school of law, and Hanbali school of law. And they represented Muslims, and Muslims engaged with them. Last century or so, they were removed from our societies, or they were severely restricted. And so what happened was it created a vacuum, and these movements came in, which is the result, which is why we have problems. You never hear about this in historical accounts, illa mashallah. This is very, very dangerous. I've seen people get burnt out. I've seen people become very, very extreme. So there's a lot I can say about all of this, but I'm going to stop there, inshallah ta'ala. Are there any measures you take to retain and remember things you read? Notes. I love taking notes. Um, I literally, when I read stuff, it's very, very useful. I write stuff down. Diagrams works for me. Some people don't like diagrams because for me, it connects things. So when I'm writing, I'm consciously, when I'm reading, if I read something very interesting, I'm consciously thinking about how I can connect it to other areas. So that opens your mind up and makes you more reflective. Helps me memorize. I also think looking at haram, engaging in haram, all of these things are going to be a detriment to your hifz, because especially when it comes to sacred learning, you cannot put something, um, knowledge in here, which is knowledge that's pure, into a glass that's filled with filth. So you have to have the capacity and less distractions. I say to people, the more distracted you are, the less you're going to retain, because your mind's all over the place, right? Keep the wavelengths clear. So that's some practical advice. With regards to bitter coffee, I love coffee. No, I'm not having coffee today. With regards to Islam, both religion people in the Indian and the other scholar, what do you feel are the most over? With regards to Islam, in the Indian subcontinent as a scholar, what do you feel are the most overlooked and appreciated facts or sources? I think our culture, bitter coffee. I think what's happened is we've completely missed out how humans lived in the past and how they interacted with the Sharia, right? We literally have a black and white approach to everything, and that's not real. That's not practical. Read history. Read how Muslims live. Read about Islamic culture, thaqafa. We call it thaqafa. There's a lovely book called Thaqafatul Islamiyya. Many books, but people need to understand how they wrote about poetry, how they engage with one another. That's something that's missed because we've been cut off from our tradition. Um, Islam has Islam lives with culture. It doesn't destroy culture. It doesn't remove culture. It brings in, it enhances those cultures, and I think that's missing. And you see that in Muslim discourse sometimes. People are very stern, very harsh on certain things, which is very alien when you really think about it. So I think our history is missing, and sometimes we superimpose our own views about the past. We need to engage in the past on its own merit. So, for example, with my daughter Safiya, she's only 9. We started reading Ibn Battuta. Why am I reading Ibn Battuta with my daughter? Because I want her to appreciate Islamic history, Islamic culture. I want her to know what it was like in Fez, what was it like in Tangiers, how did he travel, what kind of strange things did he see when he went to India, and then he went down on a boat, and then ended up in China, and how did he negotiate, and how did he end up working for sultans, right? So I want to know all of this. What kind of strange things did he see? And I want my daughter to appreciate that the world was very, very different in time of Ibn Battuta, as an example. So that's something that's very much missing, the historical lived experience of our religion. So this is a good debate. There's two schools of thought. If you take the Hanafi usul argument, i.e., if you go for the principles, then it's difficult for one to argue for it to be wajib. And there's a whole usul discussion. I mean, if you look at the books of fiqh, they don't really, the early books, they don't really talk about the beard length in detail. In fact, Imam Marghinani in his Hidayah, for example, mentions it in the chapter of fasting. And it's not anything to do with a beard per se. He's using a form of argument, and he's basically it's masnoon to have it a fist length. So the Hanafis and the early books don't really mention a length. Some scholars, if you take the hadith approach, and there are scholars in our own tradition who will argue it's wajib. So there's two schools of thought. One school seems to be arguing that it's wajib to have a fist length, and some scholars say, well, in the Hanafi school at least, it's hard to argue, and they kind of take a very usul argument. In my view, you don't need to be as long as people we don't need to like kill each other over this. It's important to have a beard. You should have a beard. It's part of our identity. It's what makes us unique in some ways. But I also think about practice. It should be also about akhlaq, our ethics, our morality, our way of living. Was just as important. If you have a long beard, but you're kind of like a bad example, then actually you're doing the opposite. You're giving a bad name to your religion. So it's important that we don't become obsessed with identity politics, which is like a modern thing, a modern, when the social anthropologists came to these strange faraway lands, they were obsessed with identity. And Muslims have taken this on as well to a certain extent. So for us, it's about akhlaq, it's about beauty of character, beauty of the way we do things as well. Again, goes back to the previous question about what we lost about our history. Yeah, so Imam Razi is amazing. Doctor, a friend of mine, Dr. Shoaib, in Scotland, has translated parts of it. But learn Arabic. If you really want to appreciate the tradition, learn Arabic and make intention. English is obviously, if it's written well, it's translated well, it's useful in English, but nothing beats learning some Arabic. So make an intention to learn Arabic, or at least study Arabic. You don't have to complete it. But I have a lot of students who I teach Arabic to. In fact, myself, I don't engage in serious religious conversation with people unless they know Arabic, because it's very, very important. I've met academics who say you don't need to know Arabic, who say, oh, we don't need to Arabic. But I would argue that if you're going to be serious about your religion, then you need to have familiarity with Arabic. And then obviously the other Islamic languages, for example, Persian. Urdu is more recent, but these sort of languages are important to bear in mind. Jazakallah khair, we appreciate the answer. I hope you're not bitter anymore, inshallah ta'ala. Plato, Socrates, well, we borrowed from them. What more do I need to say? We took our, as Muslims, as Islamic civilization in Baghdad and these places, the books were translated, we enhanced them, we give it a religious insight. We took what was good, left what was bad. Imam Razi, of course, Imam Razi ibn Rushd is better than them. As far as we know, they had Iman. If you have Iman, then no one can come closer to someone who doesn't have Iman, right? So if you have Iman, of course they're better than them, and you're going to benefit from Imam Razi ibn Rushd, because they're going to be people who practice their faith, or believers. We know they were believers. Of course, you're going to benefit from them more than people who. That doesn't mean you don't read people who are non-Muslims. What I'm saying is there's nur in people who write who are Muslims. Okay, so their works are useful. If you're going to go into all of this, worth studying Aqidah with someone as well, so you're rooted. You don't lose yourself in these fields. Tamam. Let's see if you have any more questions. Let's hide that one. Okay, wonderful. Lots of questions coming through today. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. There's one thing I wanted to add as well. I was with a friend of mine. Actually, I was with a barber yesterday, and they were talking, in the barbers, people talk about all sorts of things. They were talking about marriage. And I think there was a brother there who was looking to get married, and he asked me a few questions. And I was trying to stay out of the conversation. I didn't want to get too involved in marriage conversations, especially at the barbers. You just want to get your haircut and go home. But he asked me about marriage and its importance. And one of the things I shared with him was that what we need to understand as believers today, especially those of us who live in the West, or even people who live outside of the West, is that the culture we live in, it's very, very much about individualism. It's all about me. It's all about my desire. It's all about my fulfillment. Right? It's all about me. And that's so prevalent. You see it everywhere. You even see it in mosques. You see in Muslim cultures. It's everywhere. It seeps in. When you think about LGBTQI, when you think about liberalism, all of these things come from that philosophy. It comes from the so-called post-enlightenment thinkers. Why is that important? What has that got to do with marriage? It has everything to do with marriage. It has everything to do with your existence, because it's in the air that you breathe. And if you don't know of the disease that you have, or the disease that's out there, you won't be able to inoculate yourself from it. So having said that, marriage is the opposite. Marriage is about selflessness. Marriage is about sacrificing your needs for her, or her for your needs. That's what makes a successful marriage. Because, as going back to Ibn Arabi, he would say that men have distinct qualities, women have distinct qualities. They have distinct qualities. Right? The man is supposed to be the one who protects the family, provides security, provides aman. The woman is the one who provides sort of like the feminine side, which is like keeping, having feelings, having emotions, and all of that. So they both come together, but they both have distinct qualities. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Allah Ta'ala created men in a certain way. Allah Ta'ala created women in a certain way. But when you have these two and they come together, it's kind of like a divine thing, because what's happening now is you're kind of removing differences, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being the one, ahad, is free from any opposition. Allah doesn't have any opposition. There's no opposites. There's no contradiction, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what you're trying to do is, in your journey, you're trying to melt away these differences, these antagonistic forces, and you're trying to come towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is very, very important. So marriage is, if you want a successful marriage, it's about qurbani. That's why when we perform the nikah, we talk about taqwa. We talk about fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't mean fear in the sense that Allah's some sort of vengeful, is very vengeful. No, what it means is that you don't want to disappoint Allah. You don't want to let Him down. When you really love someone, it's a form of like, I want to please them. I want to make my teacher happy. I want to make my sheikh happy, right? And the fear comes from the fact that I don't want them to be displeased with me. So that's what it means with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in marriage, it's about coming together, and you're both on this journey now to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whatever it takes, we get there together. Inshallah, you'll be with your spouse in Jannah. So it's about sacrifice. It's about making her happy or her making you happy. And that's why when we teach marriage, these things are very, very important. We don't need to become legalistic, but we also need to have a spiritual side. That men have certain urges, they have certain desires. Women have different types of desires, right? And there's nothing wrong with them. Men like more of the intimate side of things. Women like less. Women prefer less of that, and they prefer just being around you. So you work together in that relationship. All right. Imam Razi is a gem. Of course he is. No doubt. Alhamdulillah. Oh, mashallah. So according to Alhamdulillah, that's beautiful. According to Hassan Spiker, it's possible. We just don't have enough knowledge about them. Yani. So we reserve judgment, and because a lot of their works have been translated and we don't really have any isnad for it, we can't really authenticate a lot of their works. Therefore, we reserve judgment. When it comes to people, the other ulama, like Ibn Sina or whatever, yes, there's been discussions on them also, but we know at least like they were writing with an Islamic mindset. It's possible that they may have been Muslim. That's why Muslims took from them, and they took their ideas. But Muslims were always confident. Muslims before me and you, pre-modern Muslims, they were confident. They would read anything and everything, and they weren't scared. They never had the inferiority complex that we have today, where we say, "Oh, everything's haram, and we don't want anyone to touch anything." Whereas they were like, "Bring it on." They were like, "Bring on your challenges, bring the best you got," because we have nothing to fear in our religion. We don't hide anything in Islam. We don't have any skeletons in the closet, and so we need to get to a level of with ilm, with strength, in physical strength, but also in confidence in our faith, in iman, that people can bring on whatever they want, and inshallah ta'ala, we are confident in our faith. Okay, thank you for that, Roshan. Okay, I think we've had almost half an hour. If there's no more questions, we will end there, inshallah ta'ala. Perfect. Okay, thank you so much to everyone. Some of you have reached out privately here and there as well, and please do share. Please do share our YouTube channel, our content. If you find it useful, share it with people. Subscribe. We do produce videos, so share those videos with people. And I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon, inshallah. Next week, same time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.